There we go. Okay, so let me share my screen. All right. So, what is it that we're studying in this class? What is human development? What is human growth and development? When we look at human growth and development, we're looking at changes in certain areas of our life over time. Sometimes we lose some abilities, sometimes we gain some abilities, but we're looking at the progression of different systems throughout our life. And I mentioned these on Tuesday, mainly the cognitive, the biological, and the socio-emotional areas of life and how they develop and change over time to make it so we're adaptive and healthy throughout the lifespan. And so, no worries. And so that's really what we're looking at as far as a course like this. Now, I will admit we will be spending a lot of time in the area of child development. And the reason being is that for the majority of the time that we've studied development, and even in popular culture, there was an assumption that human beings stopped developing at around the age of 18. Okay. For various reasons, even the first earliest theorists that we'll look at say that we stopped developing at 18. So, for a good portion of the field, it only really focused on childhood and into through adolescence. And then it assumed that we were done after that. So, but what we have learned over, I should change this, it's been about 40 years now. There has been a lot more attention put on young adulthood and later adulthood. And we feel it's kind of in response to what has happened over about the last 140 years or so. Is that over about the last 140, 120 years, our lifespan has doubled due to medical advances, sanitation advances, disease control, vaccines. We've extended our life almost double. If we were here in the 19th century, 17, 1800s, our life expectancies would have been in the 40s or so. Now, that doesn't mean there wasn't people, we could look at people like Benjamin Franklin, who lived till I believe he was 80 something and whatnot. So there was individuals that lived an extended life, but for the majority of us, our life expectancy was around the 40s. And this has actually been of debate within the adult development world. There's actually some suggestions that we actually live two lives in our life existence. We live a life between about the age of 0 to 40 and then 40 to the end of life, because we're finding that this age group between about 35 to about 45 go through a huge number of transitions. This is when a lot of people change careers, get divorced, get remarried, move, either start to have kids or are in the process of having teenagers at this time. And so a lot of changes happen at this time. And so a lot of theorists have kind of argued that maybe we live two lifetimes. Okay. Now, who should be studying developmental psychology? Well, I would definitely agree parents, or if you're taking care of an elderly person, or just for your self knowledge. But we know like counselors and social workers are important in taking this. When I first started working in the counseling field and I went to colleagues' offices, they tended to have two books in their office that were their primary books. One was the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, where you use symptomology to provide a diagnosis. And the other one was usually a developmental psychology book, because both of these practices in counseling and social work know that a child thinks very much differently than an adolescent, and a young adult thinks very much differently than an adolescent does. And so they use those books to make sure that the services they're delivering to their client is appropriate for the age and developmental phase that that person is going through. Also, if you're interested in nursing or medical programs, I know that the majority of nursing programs in other states I worked with, in Montana and some more national-based universities, all require nursing students to take a human growth and development class. It's part of their curriculum. And in most of them, you have to take it before you're even admitted into the nursing program. So that is kind of the professions who take kind of advantage of a course such as this. Okay. All right. So what I want to start with is kind of those three domains that we're going to be talking about in the class. As I mentioned, that we probably should start with the biological processes, because after all, if we weren't born with a body, there's no reason to be talking about biology or existence as it is. When we're talking about biological processes, the main processes that we'll be looking at in this course are neurological or brain development processes. But we'll also take some time and look at general growth of the body as a whole, because it has implications on things such as physical behaviors and the ability to do certain behaviors in life, such as walk and run, grab items. What we'll be talking about in early childhood, especially, is a difference between fine motor skills, being able to write your name, and gross motor skills, being able to walk, and the like. And we'll talk about those as we move, because they're directly associated with different behavioral and emotional states. Okay. The second one, and I think I may have mentioned this on Tuesday, is socio-emotional processes. Human beings are a social being. We literally cannot exist without each other. Some of the studies, for example, very unethical studies that was done in Nazi Germany during World War II, they did a series of isolation studies where they put a person in an environment where they got all the food, all the physical cares needed: food, water, warmth, and comfort. But what was denied to them is any type of human contact, whether it be smell, sight, hearing, or knowing that someone else is present. And what they found in those studies is, even when you have all of your biological needs met, if you don't have other human beings around, your body actually starts going through the starvation process. You actually start to die as if you were starving to death. And other studies in my area, such as loneliness, is actually a better predictor of the probability of obtaining a chronic disease and the age at which someone is going to pass away. And it's a better predictor than your eating habits, exercise habits, smoking habits. Your physical connection with other people are a better predictor of how long you will live than are all of those physical health aspects. So from a developmental perspective, we know that human connection is important, especially in childhood, because as I mentioned on Tuesday, human beings are one of the very few species that are born with an underdeveloped physical brain, meaning we're not built with the capacities to right away start searching for food or mimicking mom's behaviors, or do other human things such as instantly start to talk and those kinds of things. Those things develop physically between about the age of 0 and 6 and don't come fully developed until our early 20s. So therefore, we have to rely on other people, such as caregivers, parents, teachers, the community, to help us survive in the world. Okay. So socio-emotional processes are important because if evolution had intention, evolution bet that humans should be social beings, not isolate beings. And it's has shown out quite a bit. Okay. And then the third one is cognitive processes. These are the ability to use memories, current situations to decide what you should be doing right now. It's your ability to write. It's your ability to talk. It's your decision-making abilities, your quote unquote intelligence level as far as academic intelligence is concerned. And so these thought processes are the third component that we're really interested in. Now, each of these play off of one another, okay? And I'll give an example of a childhood disorder, which does go into adulthood order, is autism, okay? Autism is thought to be a biological disorder that impairs a person's social abilities. It's a social disorder. And what is believed is that the social world is so overwhelming to the biological system that the individual comes up with strategies to deal with that overwhelming social world, such as stemming behaviors and needing to have everything the same and consistent. Okay. And then this allows the autistic child to exist biologically and whatnot. So that's a kind of a disorder example of how these three work together. But as we will see, even on the non-disordered level, all of these interact with each other. Hence, it's a Venn diagram and not a process diagram. Okay. So for today, I think we'll just get through one theory, but I want to talk, as I talked about on Tuesday, um, we're going to start by talking about some general theories of human development that go through different aspects of the development, such as a biological, psychological, and socio-emotional stages, to give some examples of how theory works and how it's applied to human development and growth. Okay. So what is a theory? A theory is a collection of ideas that are meant to explain observations we have about different phenomenon. In this case, how people develop and grow. Okay. And the thing that I do want to warn you is I certainly don't agree with all theories. This first theory, there's some underpinnings to logic and to human growth and development, but as a scientist, I have a difficult time with it. But in the field of human development, in the field of psychology overall, we are a very young science. Okay. I have to add 25 years since 2020. So, I mean, we're only about 175 years old as far as a science is concerned. And in any science, it starts with a lot of theories. And then as we grow over time, those theories become combined and closer, and we get more and more refined. Okay, an example is physics. When we look at Greek physics and all of those type theorists, there were lots of theories about how objects move and interact with each other. But then over the centuries, we've come to certain laws, such as Newton laws, Einstein's laws, and other laws, to where there's just a grouping of theories that then drive the research within physics. So the way I would think about these theories is that where one stops explaining some aspect of a development, another one picks up. So in this first theory, we're going to talk about unconscious processes that are biologically pinned. Okay, that one doesn't explain everything, but then the next one will explain more of the cognitive processing. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up, but I do want to start with um, um, one of the very first theories in developmental psychology, which came from probably one of the more well-known psychologists, Dr. Sigmund Freud, and where really something called stage theory started. Okay, a lot of theories in psychology and developmental psychology are what are known as stage theories, that at certain ages, we need to develop some type of knowledge and ability. And then that sets us up for success in the next stage where we have to learn and adapt to something else. Okay. We're starting with Sigmund Freud because he's actually the first person to introduce this idea of stage theory um, as a source of development. The other reason why we're going to start with Sigmund Freud is he's also from a psychological perspective, stopped development at the age of 18. Okay. So he's kind of set the standards for we should look at development as far as stages. And he was the one that kind of said we don't develop anymore after the age of 18. But his theory, he meant to be a biological theory based on evolutionary theory. Okay. And evolution suggests that individuals, well, a species evolves over several millennia of time, and as they adapt to a given environment. Okay. And what Freud did is he wanted to extend that idea to human beings. Is human beings have been able to adapt to almost, not all, but almost every environment on the earth. Okay, with the exception of very extreme environments. Okay, but we even visit there. So, and so he felt that for human survival, there must be two instincts or some instincts that make it so that we're able to adapt as a human race, as a human existence. Okay. And eventually he's going to narrow these down to some Greek words, eros and thantos. Okay. Eros is in Greek terms the life instinct. Thantos is in Greek terms the death instinct. Okay. But those don't really define what the purpose or the behavior that is associated with those two instincts. So in Zoom land, if you have kids in the room, you might want to ask them to leave or put some headphones on, because what Freud is going to reduce our two most basic instincts to is sex and aggression. That really what drives us is our need to reproduce, to gratify sexual needs and pleasure, and to also protect ourselves because we know we're going to eventually die. So we have to protect who we are through life, through aggression. Okay. And so, he believed, I'll use this next model here to kind of explain, he believed that our basic instincts are in what he called our unconscious mind, meaning that we're not aware of our sexual and aggressive drives that drive everything that we do. Okay. He's going to come up with this kind of iceberg model where 10% of what we're aware of, just like an iceberg, is above the water. Okay. But 90% of what drives our behavior and what we do sits under the water, which he defined as the unconscious. Okay. Now he's going to place the sex and aggression drive in what he called the id. It's the literal translation from German to English is it. But in German, the term id has more because it is the place, it is the location of our basic instinctive drives. Okay. Now, if you could imagine, if we look at this from an evolutionary perspective, if we were going around and just trying to have sex with everybody and beat them up at the same time, we probably would have not survived as a species very long. We would have went extinct centuries ago. So the id developed what is known as the ego. The ego has the ability to access the external world and access the needs and the drive of the unconscious and determine what the appropriate behavior that a person should commit in order to both satisfy the social, environmental needs of the world, but also the needs of the id in the unconscious mind. Okay. Now, to finish his model, and I'm giving a quick overview of this because what we're more interested in is his developmental model. But the ego and id also developed what was known as a superego, as an antagonist to the id. Okay. The id works off the pleasure principle. It's only wanting to seek the pleasurable gratification of our two basic instinct. The superego works on the idealistic principle, which is the perfection of a person. How should a person morally and perfectionally act in a given situation? And so the superego is kind of that antagonist to try and tell the ego what we should do and what we should not do given a given situation. Okay. So all of these systems are under the operation. The ego is the only one that has access to the external world. And its job is kind of as the executive to kind of determine what is appropriate. Okay. Now, according to Freudian theory, from the chaos that develops in the id and how the ego learns how to deal with that chaos, as you would say, is learned in early childhood. Okay. Now, to give some credit to Freud on this, we do know that early childhood is a very important time of development. Okay. It is predictive of a lot of the ways our emotions, our personality as adults and whatnot. So we do know now, because of this push, that early childhood is the basis of a lot of things we experience. It was a good place to put where we learn either dysfunction or how to functionally exist in the world. Okay. So he's going to set up different stages of development and different things that we need to accomplish. All right. And just as you could guess, there's always conflict between the ego and the id and all of these structures. So he's going to develop what's called a conflict theory, that at different stages of early childhood, we come across a conflict that largely deals with the satisfaction of some pleasure. Okay. So his theory is a stage that is based on different areas that provide a sensual satisfaction at a given stage. Now, I want to spell sensual in Freudian terms. Sensual is spelled S-E-X. Okay. And just to kind of give an idea of why he felt that this need to integrate a sensual, satisfying thing in each of these stages is simply bottle feeding or breastfeeding. If you ever want to know the work a baby puts into just to get nutrients into that little person's body, try to eat your dinner tonight only with a bottle and sucking on the nipple. Okay, that's the only way you can eat tonight with a liquid. Okay, and come back next Tuesday and tell me how fun it was, because it's a lot of work. And in fact, that's why baby's milk has so much fat in it, because if it wasn't for the fat content, the baby would actually burn more calories than what it was by getting the food in, than what they were actually receiving. And that's why a lot of baby formulas and breast milk have a lot of fat in them, because it takes longer to absorb and use as energy. Okay. So what Freud felt is that in order for the infant to want to eat at such an exhausting effort, it must provide some type of sensual satisfaction. And so in his first stage of development, he felt that it was the oral phase, that because we need to get nutrients in, that we must have some gratification orally. Okay. Now the conflict becomes is, can we start to control our sensual need for oral intake? Okay. So if we are and we learn, we can start to chew food and ingest at an appropriate rate and everything else, we successfully go on to the next stage, and it sets us up for control over our intake of things. Okay. Freud believed that this explains things like addiction, obesity, and people who need to ingest more than what they need. Freud himself felt like he was orally fixated because he had to have a cigar every day from the age of 12 until he died. And he actually died of jaw cancer from cigar smoking. But he felt like he stated that people who are obese, it's because they couldn't control that oral intake from the age of 0 to 2. Now, this is where Freud's theory does enter into popular culture, is that we now know from science that obesity is not necessarily caused by over ingestion of food. Okay. In fact, if we take the majority of people who are obese, they eat just as much or less than the person who has an average weight. Okay. So it's more about metabolism and all of those things than it is about how much someone eats or ingests. Okay. But in the nutrition field, in the weight loss programs and all of those things, what is the goal? To get the obese person to eat less because they can't control themselves from eating food. And so we need to get them to limit the number of calories that they're eating. And if you believe that, you're Freudian. That's a Sigmund Freud idea. It's not necessarily a scientific idea. So just kind of a caveat on popular culture and how Freud influenced popular culture. That is one area that he did. I don't know if you want to say well in, but he did in. Okay. So the next phase that Freud suggested is what's known as the anal phase. Now, to me, the first diploma a child should receive and the biggest celebration we should start with a child, we give big celebrations for graduations, marriages, a lot of time divorces, um, uh, getting your driver's license, all of those things we tend to celebrate. I think one of the first celebrations we should celebrate is when a child actually becomes potty trained. Okay. Because I want you to think about the significance of potty training, because in our adult minds, we think, oh, well, that's no big deal, you know. Um, but I want you to think about this in this context. When we became potty trained, it is the first time in our life that we really gave in to the demands of an authority figure who was saying that we need to control our bowel movements. That's one aspect. The other aspect is it's the first time that we're going to take control of a biological process, because we are going to choose a time and a place to defecate or urinate. So we're controlling a biological process. Okay. So, and so again, in this phase, Freud argued that a person will either become anally fixated or they will maintain biological self-control and have good control over their biological systems. Okay. So, and again, if we get into popular culture, if you've ever called someone anal, or if you've been called anal, according to Freud, you were stuck in the anal phase of development. Okay. Because what a person who is anally fixated is that because they couldn't take control of internal processes, they took excessive control over their environment. So this is a person that has to have everything perfect. It's the person that comes to the meeting saying, oh, you need to sit here and you need to, you know, that person who has to have their external world very structured. Okay. And according to Freud, this is where that dysfunction, as you would say, started, if you are anal. But that's another cultural aspect of Freud that is as a term that we often use. Okay. There's something. Okay. Okay. The next phase, which is probably one of Freud's more controversial ones, so I'm going to kind of put it into more literal translation, is what he called the phallic phase. Okay. And in real life, parents who have had their children taking a bath or something, you've probably seen this in infancy. In fact, we can actually observe this with ultrasounds with infants in a mom's womb, is that children tend to touch pleasurable parts of their body. The term that is used is masturbation. But children will naturally touch parts of their body that feel good. And if you think of the genital areas and the millions of nerve cells that are there in that area, it feels good to touch that area. Okay. And so now I want to make this a little bit less risque on this. And just give a little bit of advice on this, as far as when you walk in on your child and they're touching themselves, it's important not to freak out, slap them away and stuff like that. The first thing you should do is ask why they're doing that. Okay. If they say something like, mommy, it feels good, or daddy, it feels good when I touch there, okay, that's a natural thing for the child to do. And then it's lesson time about the meaning of that, and there should be the only one, and blah, 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 right? However, if they say something like, well, Uncle Joe showed me how, then you have a problem. Okay. Then you need to start looking at the potential of abuse of something like that. But I've seen a lot of parents instantly jump to abuse when they find their child touching themselves, when in reality, it may just be something natural for them. So it's important to have that calm conversation and refrain from freaking out when you find a child doing this. All right, but going back to Freud, he put the phallic phase in here, because there's also something very social that is happening during this time. When we get to early childhood, in fact, it starts around the age of 2 to 6, we're going to talk about the importance of play. And uh, one type of play is mimicry play, exploration play. Okay, this is a time in a child's life when they are going to put on different hats and decide kind of who they want to be. So they're going to, for example, watch Superman on TV, and they're going to go inevitably wrap a towel around their neck and go try and fly around and find out they can't fly. But they might find some other value of Superman they might keep. They will go play firefighter, cop, robber. They will play house, play doctor. And we're finding that this imitative play is really important in developing the individual that that child's going to be. When we get to the age of 4 and 6, we will actually find that between the age of 4 and 6, a person develops and solidifies many of their core personality traits. Indeed, at the age of 5 is the best predictor, for example, if a child will end up going to college someday, or if they will do some other type of career in their life. It's the best predictor is their attitude during that age. So one thing that children are doing is they're looking at mom and dad, okay? And they're trying to figure out male-female relationships, okay? This is where Freud came up with what's known as the Oedipus complex. And later, Carl Jung will come up with what's called the Electra complex, okay? The Oedipus complex comes from a Greek mythology about Oedipus, who there was a curse that said that someday when he grew up, he would end up killing his father for his mother's affection. Okay. Scared of this, Oedipus' parents didn't want this to happen. So they sent Oedipus to another town, a city far, far away, where he was raised by who he thought were his actual biological parents. Okay. But then he returned to his parents' biological town, didn't know it was his mother, didn't know it was his father. And indeed, what did he end up doing? He ended up falling in love with his mother and killing his father. Now, this is where I kind of disagree with Freud on this Oedipus complex and why he named it this. Because if you think of Oedipus, he did everything he could not to get in a relationship with his biological mother. So it's kind of a contradiction in story and fairy tale. But what is the Oedipus complex? It's a young boy's desire to have a relationship with their mother. And where does what interferes with the relationship between the boy and the mother? Well, there's this thing called the father, this object that is in the child's way. But what is the best way to compete with the father? It's to compete with the father, to do what he does, have his mannerisms, have his interactions the way he interacts with mom. Okay. And so that's how he gains access then to his mother. Okay. Now, Carl Jung is going to add the Electra complex, which is also known as penis envy. This is kind of gets a little bit even deeper and darker for the girls, is that girls recognize that dad has something that she does not have. And that is his penis. Okay. And so in order to have that, she recognizes that she needs to take on the mannerisms of the person that does have access to it, which is her mother. Okay. And so she starts to mimic and have the mannerisms of the mother and how the mother interacts with the father. Okay. Now, um, this is one of the more strange aspects of Freud's theory. He had to put it in these sexual terms, but I do want to kind of uh, give the more non-sexual version of this stage of development. So um, we have had now decades of divorced parents. Okay. And I will say that if you are a single parent, you have my admiration. You have a very difficult job. And this is not a hit on single parenting. And I want to make this very clear. But we've had enough children who are raised by single mothers who have had sons that because of the single mother's experiences, she has denied the young boy access to a male role model, whether it be a boyfriend, an uncle, a grandfather. She's kind of kept the boy isolated from having some type of male-like role model. We've also had enough single dads who, because of their experiences with females, do the same thing with their little girls. They don't allow the girls to have female role models in their life. And we have found in these family systems that both the young boys and the young girls grow up and have difficulties in relationships. They have difficulties in romantic relationships and reactions of the opposite sex because they never learned how to model male and female interactions. Okay. So there's kind of there's some kind of truth once you carve back the sexual components of Freud's theory. There is some consequences for not having same-sex and opposite sex role models in a child's life. Now, this is also, I'm going to bring this up right now. This is where I can talk about Freud and his feelings on homosexuality, gay and lesbian propensities, is he felt that being gay or being lesbian is a dysfunction that a child occurred when developing the Oedipus and when trying to work through the Oedipus and Electra complex, and that being gay and being lesbian, or I'm going to use the old term homosexual, is a disorder. It's a dysfunction of development. Hence, it wasn't until 1999, I believe it was, that homosexuality was taken out of the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual as an official mental disorder. So it took us 150 years after this to realize that Freud was not wrong, was not right, and neither were the moral theorists of the time. So this is one consequence of this idea of male-female interactions. But I will say more current research suggests that even a gay or a lesbian child has to have the same sex and opposite sex role models, or they do have difficulties as well in relationships later in life. Okay, so something to kind of keep in mind. All right. So the next phase of development is what was known as the latent phase. This goes from about the age of 6 to puberty. And I feel like this was one of the biggest misjustices when studying child development, because what Freud is going to say is there's really nothing developmentally that occurs during this period. We grow skills, we learn how to write, math, those kinds of things, but nothing majorly developmentally happens during this time. And this has had pretty poor consequences on this age of kiddos, because the literature has largely ignored the elementary age of children. Um, what literature we do have usually comes out of education literature from elementary schools and studies done in the school systems, but very few studies are done in the interactions between mothers and parents and caregivers and family members, which is a very unfortunate part. If you're interested in becoming a developmental psychologist, there's a good area that you can go into because it's probably one of the areas that is least studied in developmental psychology or child development. Okay. So the next phase, though, which goes from puberty to the age of 18, as mentioned, is what he called the genital phase or the mature sexuality phase. This is where we take all of our accumulated experiences that we learned in the phallic, anal, and oral phase and start to have intimate and sexual interactions with other individuals. Okay. This is where we go from childhood masturbation to, for example, adult masturbation, where it includes fantasization along with the sensual, the physical sensation. Okay. And again, in the genital phase, if we learn how to control our adult sexual needs, we then go on into adulthood, being able to have good, healthy sexual relationships as adults. Okay. Okay. So this is the stage theory that set the base for what other stage theories we'll talk about in the class. As you can see, it is very much tied to his theory of our two primary drives. And some critiques we could probably give of Freud is, are we only driven by sex and aggression? Probably not. In fact, we know where we have other primary human drives that are just as important. Is much of our life developed from the unconscious? Yes, we do have unconscious drives, and we have unconscious behaviors. And those behaviors become more and more prevalent the more and more stress we have, and the less control our higher areas of our brain have to control those impulsive unconscious drives. So there's some areas that it is. We talked about some of the direct relationships between research within that phallic phase. And we do know, when we're talking from more of a research perspective, the oral and anal phase, while they don't work out the same, we do know that this is the time where children are trying to learn how to control their temperature, their hunger, their thirst, the ability to eat, the ability on their own, the ability to dress themselves. And so that they are trying to learn some self-control and self abilities during these phases. But this is the theory that sets the stage for the rest. Okay. And I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to preview what we're going to talk about Tuesday. We'll spend part of class on Tuesday going over our assignments, what we'll be doing as far as assignments are concerned. And we'll continue this conversation with our next stage theory that comes from Jean Piaget. And I won't get too much into it, but this one is dealing with cognitive development and how we change cognitively over time. And he specifically noted how we structure knowledge. But as you will see, he also felt that we developed in stages through childhood. So that's where we will head next time. But for now that I all probably weirded everybody out with Freud, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.